But today I'm going to talk about mindfulness. And why is mindfulness so important a topic? Because we overuse it in the West. I remember back in the days, 1971, I was 15 years old. I came to the United States in June. For some reason or another, I can go into that as a long story. I came a month after my parents and my two younger brothers. So they were kind of already settled down. And my father was already working for my aunt and uncle who owns a Chinese restaurant in San Leandro, for those of you who know San Leandro, Castro Valley. And so it was in the beginning of June, not quite school time yet. My dad, his normal self would never want his number one son to just wander around the street. So he asked my aunt and uncle to get me into summer school in San Leandro. Now back then, San Leandro is a really white neighborhood. But on the other hand, I grew up in my father's barbershop reading comic book. And I remember my favorite comic book was Archie. And so when I go to San Leandro, it's like being in Archie's. You have the baseball field, you have the kids with the freckles. It's just like in Archie. It's amazing. But I was really curious about what Chinese food is my uncle and aunt serving, because when I look at the menu, they have egg fouillon and sweet and sour pork and fried prawns with sweet and sour sauce, and they have chow mein and monggu gai pan. I said, I want to see what that is. I've never seen it before. And so when they serve it to the customer, I take a look and I said, wow, that's Chinese food? That is not Chinese food. I never seen that before. But that is typical of the Western way, is that in any of our learning, we tend to truncate it as soon as we see benefit. As soon as we see a way of making money, we truncate it. So the journey becomes the destination. The seagull becomes the attraction. That's unfortunate. And this is true with meditation. And so we have so many different kinds of meditation. We have mindfulness meditation, we have Zen meditation, we have Chan meditation, which is the original version of Zen in China. It's only after they came to Japan they became Zen. We have Vipassana meditation, we have insight meditation, which is another name for Vipassana. We have Transcendental Meditation. Every one of them is a silo. It's an end to the self, which is very unfortunate. It's like looking at the elephant with the periscope. You don't even get to smell the elephant, but you look at it, and when you see the leg, you say, oh, that's a tree trunk elephant. When you see the tail, you say, oh, that's a rope elephant. When you see the tooth, you say, that's a saber elephant. Whereas in fact, they all make up the whole. So you cannot really have meditation as a spiritual practice without mindfulness. You can't have it without Zen. Zen means chana. Chana means sentimentation. That's when you say, I feel it, I accept it, and I let it go. I let it settle. You can't not have a spiritual practice without Vipassana. Vipassana is in fact the original contribution of Buddha. Vipassana just means seeing, feeling without judging. That is the ultimate in the practice, but it requires mindfulness and Zen as a foundation. Okay? On the other hand, there's a lot of benefit in taking the journey as the destination, right? So there's been a lot of documented health benefit to just mindful meditations. People talk about how to reduce stress and anxiety, improve focus and concentration, better emotional control, and increase self-awareness, enhance sleep, enable pain management, lower your blood pressure, boost your immunity. All that is true. All that is true, but that is a benefit of pursuing a spiritual practice. It's the seagull that you met in the journey. It's not the journey and the destination itself. So in the future, I'll be talking about a syllabus that I put together for our spiritual training. And I don't want to do it now because I don't want to distract you from the intelligence by thinking that understanding is the practice. It's the experience that is the practice. So I want to focus more on the technique, focus on guiding you step by step into the journey and not giving you all that information. But there is a syllabus, and part of the syllabus contains something called the 7 sets of 37 factors of enlightenment. And this is really taking all Buddha has taught and thinking of it as 7 pieces of a puzzle. But the 7 pieces actually overlap. So the 37 factors that are in these 7 pieces actually repeat itself. And one of that repeats is mindfulness. And mindfulness, as I said, is mentioned in one of those pieces of the puzzle called the 4 foundations of mindfulness. But it's also in another piece, which is very important for our discussion today, something called Indriya. I-N-D-R-I-Y-A. Now that word is interesting. That word means literally belonging, or agreeable, or communicable with Indra. Indra is a deity, is a god. It's like the governor of our realm. In the Chinese mythology, it's called the Jade Emperor. It's like the CEO. So it says that these are the faculties that we can communicate with our governor, with our CEO. And there are 2 ways to think about this set of faculties. One is the physical faculties, and one is the spiritual faculties. The physical faculties are something that I mentioned already. And in Chinese, they are called the sense doors. Now, this is going to be important when we talk about Vipassana, when we talk about samatha and all that, which is how you deal with your sense doors. So these 6 physical faculties are the eyes, the nose, the tongue, the ear, the body, and the thinking mind. Okay? It's important to understand that none of them exist after you die. On the other hand, more important to our discussion today is the other interpretation of the word Indriya, which are the spiritual faculties. So there are 5 spiritual faculties, and 3 of them I already mentioned. Faith, which include confidence, perseverance, or what I call persistence, and then finally is mindfulness. Those 3 forms the foundation, like the concrete, they're the composite. One reinforces another. I'll talk about that next week. And then following that is something called samadhi, and then finally something called panya. So when I talk about the Shambhala warriors, I talk about the weapons, and one is wisdom, which is really panya. And that's really when you let go of your internal entanglement and let the inner wisdom reveal itself. And the other one is the compassion, right? Now, so come back to what mindfulness is. And I wanted to make it simple, because it's very important to make it simple, and very important not to complicate it. Because if you complicate it and make it into something else, you're starting to use your intellect. You start to judge. You start to think of your spiritual practice as a knowledge and not as experience. It's important to fall back and say, it is just very simple. Mindfulness just means anchoring. That's all it means. If you know how to anchor your mind, whether you're standing, whether you're sitting, whether you're lying down, or when you're moving, you're exercising, that's enough, right? That's all we need, because if you understand that as just one of the stepping stones, then you will open the idea that there are more to come. But if you're trying to overcomplicate it and make it into something else that becomes your destination, then you're truncated and you start to thinking Ik Fuyong and Mong Ku Kai Pen as Chinese cuisine. So satay for me is anchoring. But what is mindfulness to me is anchoring. But where is mindfulness? Where does it come from? Let's go back to the beginning. So mindfulness in Pali is sati, S-A-T-I. Is first used is the first translation was in 1881, when there was an English scholar, a scholar from England, who was a Pali language expert. And when he translated the Pali scriptures into English, he encountered this word called sati. And he was the one that chose to translate into mindfulness with a Y, M-Y-N-D, I don't know why. And he specifically says that it means to remember. That, back then, originally, that's what it means. I want to tell you a story, just so you can remember what sati is. Sati is the name of a goddess. And once upon a time in North India, there were a king and a queen of a small country. It's back then, small country. They're basically landlords, right? They had everything. They had sons by the dozen. They have land, they have citizens, they have good weather, they have everything. They just don't have a daughter. They really, really wanted the daughter. So one day they came to the goddess and they said, we do whatever you want us to do. We just want to have a daughter. So the goddess Sati says, okay, I can be your daughter. I will incarnate into your daughter, but you have to make me a promise. You will never disrespect me. And if you do, you will have to suffer the consequence. And the king and the queen say, yeah, we'll do that, no problem. So Sati became the daughter, the only daughter. She grew up pretty. She grew up very, very artistic and all that. Like the most desirable daughter you can ever have. Except she likes to marry below her class. In India they have this caste system. And the king belongs to the higher caste. And she dared to fall in love with someone from the very low caste, who's actually who turned out to be one of the gods, but just from a low caste. His name is Shiva. Now Shiva is actually called Adi Yogi. He is actually the original yogi teacher, but that's a different story. But anyway, she married below her below her caste, and so her parents her father was infuriated. So one day they had a celebration. It was one of those fire offering. You know that if you're familiar with the Tibetan practice. And the father decided not to invite the son-in-law. So Sati came storming in. He says, why do you not invite my husband? You insulted my husband, which means that you insulted me. And you remember the promise that you made, you will never disrespect me. So she jumped into the fire and reincarnated as the second wife of Shiva, someone named Parvati, which has a history in the yoga practice, but that's a different story. So when Buddha wanted his student to understand the meaning of mindfulness, he used the word sati, just to remember. You make a promise, you remember. Tragically, sati means something else too. It's a practice that has been outlawed in the old days. When the husband died, the widow would jump into the fire with her, thinking that is how she would remember her husband. That's a sad story, but that's just how the culture works. So with that story, I just want you to think very simply. Whenever we talk about mindfulness, use the word anchoring, nothing else. Just remember, anchor your mind. Where do you anchor? Anchor your mind, mindful of your body. Anchor your mind on your body when you move. When you walk on the street, when you walk in the park, anchor your mind on the bottom of your feet. When you make your breakfast, anchor it on your fingers. When you eat, anchor it on your tongue. Anchor on your body when you're moving. Anchor your body mindful of your breath when you're not moving. So as soon as you sit down, mindful of your breath. You stand up, you're mindful of your breath. You lie down, you're mindful of your breath. Now, connecting that with the lecture I gave, the Dhamma talk I gave last week about intelligence versus intellectual system, is really to slow down your brain so you don't judge right away, but instead you focus on the sensation. You unleash the greater part of your intelligence system. Okay? That's what it does.